At 3:07 a.m., my husband came home drunk, collapsed to his knees, and begged me to forgive him because by 10 a.m., everything would change. He said it like a warning. What he didn't know was that I had already seen the future he was trying to escape. As secrets surfaced and timelines collided, I stopped reacting and started calculating. This is the story of quiet revenge where silence became my sharpest weapon, and patience destroyed everything he thought he controlled. At 3:07 inches the morning, my husband came home drunk. Not the sloppy kind of drunk. Not the laughing, careless kind. This was the kind that knows exactly what it did and exactly what time is running out. The front door didn't slam. It didn't even click loudly. I noticed him because the house went wrong. You know how silence has weight when something bad is about to happen? That. I was awake. I always was, lately. From the top of the stairs, I watched him sway in the foyer, one hand pressed flat against the wall like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His suit jacket was still on, his tie was loose but not undone like he'd wanted to look respectable while begging. He didn't call my name. He just fell. Right there on the marble floor we picked together when we still believed in permanence. He dropped to his knees so suddenly it sounded rehearsed. And then he said it. Forgive me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Like a deadline. He looked up at me with red eyes and said something I will never forget. Forgive me now, because by 10 this morning, you won't be able to. If you're still listening right now, don't blink. This is the moment where everything fractures. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now because stories like this don't warn you twice. And if you refuse? Fine. Leave a comment later explaining why you thought you could walk away from this. I didn't move. I didn't ask what he meant. Because when a man gives you a time instead of an explanation, he's already chosen himself. My name is Catherine. And this is the night I stopped believing in accidents. He thought forgiveness was something he could extract before sunrise. What he didn't know was that I had already seen the email. At 3:07 inches the morning, my husband came home drunk. Not the careless kind of drunk. Not the laughing, loosened tie, wedding toast drunk. This was the quiet kind. The controlled kind. The kind that knows something is already broken and is hoping it can still be taped back together before daylight exposes the cracks. The front door didn't slam. That's how I knew it mattered. I was awake. I had been awake for hours, lying on my back, staring at the ceiling fan as it traced the same slow circle again and again. California nights are supposed to feel calm. Expensive calm. The kind you pay for with square footage and quiet neighborhoods. But that night, the silence felt crowded. Every tick of the clock in the hallway sounded louder than it should have. Every shadow felt like it had intent. I heard the door open. I heard it close. And then, nothing. No footsteps, no keys dropped, no muttered curse. Just stillness. I swung my legs off the bed and stood slowly, barefoot against the cold floor. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't need to. After 12 years of marriage, I knew the house in the dark better than I knew myself. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw him. At the bottom of the stairs. One hand braced against the wall, the other hanging uselessly at his side like it belonged to someone else. His suit jacket was still on. That bothered me more than the smell of alcohol drifting up the staircase. He hadn't undressed. That meant he hadn't come home to sleep. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There are seconds in life that stretch so thin you can see through them. This was one of those seconds. I noticed stupid details: the crease in his pants, the scuff on his dress shoe, the way his chest rose too fast, like he'd been rehearsing something on the drive home. Then his knees buckled. Not dramatically. Not violently. He simply let go. His body hit the marble floor with a hollow sound that echoed through the house we once called safe. And then he said it. Forgive me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Like checking a box before a deadline. I stayed where I was, gripping the banister, my fingers numb. I didn't rush down to him. I didn't ask what was wrong. I didn't touch him. I watched. Because I had learned too late that watching gives you more truth than reacting ever does. He looked up at me, eyes bloodshot. Face pale beneath the expensive beard he insisted made him look trustworthy. I need you to forgive me now, he said again. Now. Not tonight. Not eventually. Now. Then he added the sentence that split my life into a before and an after. Because by 10 this morning, you won't be able to. I remember the exact way the air felt when he said it. Heavy. Like the house itself had leaned in to listen. 10 a.m. Not tomorrow. Not someday. A specific time. Men who plan to disappear give vague timelines. Men who expect consequences give exact ones. I walked down the stairs slowly. My footsteps measured. I stopped a few feet in front of him. He didn't reach for me. He didn't try to stand. That's how I knew this wasn't a performance. This was surrender. What happens at 10? I asked. My voice surprised me. Calm. Flat. Almost bored. His mouth opened. Closed. He shook his head. I can't explain it like this, he said. I need you on my side before it happens. On my side. Like sides were still a thing. I really looked at him and felt something detach inside my chest. Not anger, not sadness. Recognition. This was not a man confessing. This was a man preparing a witness. I stepped past him and walked into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands didn't shake. That should have scared me more than anything. From the kitchen doorway, I could still see him on the floor. Small. Defeated. Waiting. Did you cheat on me? I asked. He flinched. No, he said too quickly. That was answer enough. Did you steal? I asked. Another pause. No. Another lie. Did you put my name on something I didn't agree to? I asked. That one landed. His shoulders dropped. I was trying to protect us, he whispered. There it was. The sentence men use when they've already chosen themselves. I took a sip of water and felt it move down my throat like glass. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a memory flickered, an email notification from earlier that evening. One I hadn't opened yet. One I had felt instead. Go to bed, I said. He looked up at me, startled. What? Go to bed, I repeated. Sleep it off. We'll talk in the morning. Relief flooded his face so fast it almost made me smile. He nodded. Scrambled to his feet. Avoided my eyes as he passed me on the stairs. I listened to the bedroom door close. And then I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at my phone. 3:19 a.m. I opened the email. By the time I finished reading, I understood exactly why 10 o'clock mattered. And I understood something else, too. He thought forgiveness was a transaction. He thought time was on his side. He had no idea the clock had already switched sides. By sunrise, I wouldn't be deciding whether to forgive him. I'd be deciding how much he was going to lose. I didn't go back to bed. That surprised me. I had always been the kind of woman who processed pain horizontally curled into sheets, staring into darkness, letting sleep blur the sharp edges. But that night, sleep felt like surrender. And I had already given up enough without realizing it. I stayed in the kitchen. The house hummed softly around me, the refrigerator cycling, the distant tick of the hallway clock, the faint echo of his breathing upstairs, muffled through drywall and denial. 3:31 a.m. I sat at the kitchen island and reread the email. Again. And again. Not because I didn't understand it, but because part of me kept hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something survivable. It was from a firm I didn't recognize. Not legal. Not medical. Financial. Very financial. It addressed me politely. Too politely. The kind of tone companies use when they want you calm before they take something away. Dear Mrs. Attached were documents. PDFs. Cleanly labeled. Professionally prepared. I didn't open them yet. I stared at the subject line instead. Notice of involvement. Not accusation. Not warning. Involvement. Upstairs, the bed creaked as he shifted in his sleep. He was already escaping into unconsciousness while I was still standing at the edge of something irreversible. I thought about the man I married. The version of him that existed before everything became strategic. Before conversations turned into negotiations. Before apologies came with timestamps. I remembered how he used to say, "I hate secrets." Men who say that usually mean they hate being left out of them. At 4:02 a.m., I finally opened the first attachment. It took me less than 30 seconds to understand why he'd come home drunk instead of confident. My name was on it. Not typed casually. Not referenced. Signed. A signature that looked like mine. Careful. Practiced. Forgery isn't dramatic when it's done well. It's quiet. Convincing. Designed to survive scrutiny. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had prepared for me to be blamed. I didn't cry. That realization came later, and it disturbed me more than the betrayal itself. I closed the file and opened the next, and the next. By the third document, the shape of it all began to emerge, not details yet but direction, a funnel, a narrowing path. By 10 a.m. something would go public, something that would need a name. And he had given them mine. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street was still, lawns manicured into obedience. Cars sleeping in driveways like nothing ugly had ever happened behind their doors. I wondered how many houses on this block were holding secrets that hadn't ripened yet. How many women were still asleep because no one had bothered to warn them. I checked the time again. 4:47 a.m. I had 5 hours and 13 minutes before the world changed. Not to fix it. Not to stop it. To decide who it would destroy. Upstairs, his alarm would go off at 6. He'd wake with a headache and relief. He'd believe the hardest part was over because he'd knelt. Because he'd asked. Men like him think humility erases intent. I began to understand something important in that moment. He hadn't come home to confess. He'd come home to anchor me, to make sure I didn't run before the fallout hit. I went to the office. The room still smelled faintly of leather and printer ink. His trophies lined the shelves, awards with his name engraved in gold. A life built on appearing indispensable. I powered on the desktop. The password hadn't changed. That hurt more than it should have. I didn't search wildly. I didn't panic-click. I navigated calmly. Methodically. The way I always had when managing household chaos. He never noticed. Folders opened, files appeared. And there it was. A trail. Not a confession. Not a manifesto. Just enough carelessness to prove intent. He hadn't expected me to look. He'd expected me to forgive. At 5:38 a.m., I heard him stir upstairs. I closed everything, left the office exactly as I found it, even straightened a picture frame he'd knocked slightly crooked months ago. Because timing matters. And so does normalcy. I poured myself another glass of water, watched the sky begin to soften at the edges. Dawn was coming. And with it, the illusion that this could still be handled privately. When he came downstairs, he looked smaller than he had the night before. Hungover. Hopeful. He kissed my cheek like muscle memory. Morning, he said carefully. I smiled. Not warmly. Not cruelly. Precisely. Morning, I said back. He thought my calm meant forgiveness. What it really meant was preparation. He watched me more than he spoke that morning. That was the first thing I noticed. Not obvious watching, not staring. The kind of sideways glances you only catch when you're no longer trying to be seen. Every time I turned away, his eyes followed as if he were checking to see whether I had already begun to disappear. I moved through the kitchen like everything was normal. Coffee brewed. Toast popped. Plates clinked. Domestic sounds have a way of lying for you if you let them. He sat at the island, rubbing his temples, his phone face down beside him. He hadn't checked it once. That alone told me something was scheduled, something he couldn't afford to look at early. Did you sleep at all? He asked. Enough, I said. It wasn't a lie. Just incomplete. I could feel the words pressing against his teeth. He wanted to talk about last night. He wanted absolution with his breakfast. He wanted me to say something, anything that confirmed he was still standing on solid ground. So I gave him what he didn't expect. Silence. I wiped the counter slowly, replaced the sponge, straightened a chair that didn't need it. When people are guilty, they fill quiet with explanations. When they're terrified, they wait for permission. About last night, he began. I raised a hand, not sharply, gently. After coffee, I said. I have a call. That part was true. His shoulders eased. He nodded. Took a sip. Burned his tongue and flinched. I pretended not to notice. The call came at 8:12 a.m. I stepped into the office and closed the door. On the other end of the line was a woman with a voice trained to sound neutral in the face of other people's disasters. She didn't apologize. She didn't threaten. She explained. By the time she finished, my suspicion had hardened into something else entirely. Certainty doesn't arrive loudly. It settles. When I hung up, I didn't sit down. I stood there, one hand on the desk, the other resting on a stack of paper that carried my name like a weapon. He had done it deliberately. Not impulsively. Not under pressure. He had weighed options. And he had chosen me. I walked back into the kitchen. He looked up immediately. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded once. "Everything's clear now." That wasn't the answer he expected. His mouth opened, closed. "What did they say?" he asked. I tilted my head slightly. "Studied him the way you study something that's already dead, just waiting to be buried." "They said 10 o'clock is real," I replied. The color drained from his face. "Catherine," he started. I interrupted him. Not with anger. With curiosity. "How long did you know?" I asked. He blinked. "Know what?" "The timing," I said. "The fact that you had a window. That you could come home at 3 and kneel and still have 6 hours to reposition yourself." His jaw tightened. "I was trying to protect us," he said again. There it was. The lie. Still breathing. "From who?" I asked. He hesitated too long. And that was when I understood the full shape of it. There wasn't one other person. There were several. And none of them were me. He reached for my hand. I let him touch me. That surprised him. My skin felt foreign to me in that moment, as if I were borrowing it for the sake of a performance I was about to end. "I just need you to trust me," he said quietly. "After today, everything will settle." I met his eyes. And for the first time since 3:07 a.m., I let something real into my voice. "I do trust you," I said. His relief was instant. Visible. He squeezed my hand. That was the moment I stopped seeing him as my husband. Because trust, I realized, doesn't mean believing someone. It means believing what they are capable of. At 9:41 a.m., he put on his jacket. He kissed my forehead. "I'll call you," he said. I watched him walk out the door with the confidence of a man who believed he'd secured forgiveness in advance. The door closed. The house exhaled. At 10 a.m., the first notification hit my phone. And with it, the beginning of the end. At 9:58 a.m., my phone was silent. That's how I knew something was wrong. No last-minute reassurance. No carefully worded text. No "we're okay" emoji meant to soften a lie. Just quiet. I stood in the living room, the sunlight cutting across the floor in sharp, geometric lines. Morning had arrived like it always did, bright, optimistic, completely unaware of the damage scheduled for release. When the notification finally came, it wasn't dramatic. No alert tone. No vibration. Just a soft banner sliding down the top of my screen. Breaking news. I didn't open it right away. There's a specific kind of fear that freezes you, not because you don't want to know, but because you already do. I tapped the screen. The headline was efficient, neutral, designed to sound responsible while naming exactly one person. Me. My name sat there in black text, clean and official, framed by words like investigation and financial irregularities. No accusations yet. Just implication. The article was already being shared. I scrolled. There was a quote. Not from me. From him. He hadn't named himself as a source, but I recognized his phrasing instantly, the way he framed responsibility like concern, the way he positioned himself as adjacent but untouched. He hadn't thrown me under the bus. He'd stepped politely aside and let it hit me alone. I laughed. Once. Quietly. Because of course he had. This wasn't desperation. This was design. I set the phone down and walked into the office again. The room felt different now, less like a shared space and more like a crime scene that hadn't been processed yet. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop, not to react, to document. By 10:14 a.m., my email was full. Some messages were confused. Some supportive. Some sharp with suspicion disguised as concern. And then there were the ones that mattered. The professional ones. The distancing ones. The kind that say we'll circle back without circling at all. This is the moment people think revenge begins. It doesn't. Revenge begins earlier, when you decide not to panic. When you decide to stay very, very still and let everyone else reveal their positions. I printed everything. The article. The emails, the documents from earlier. Paper makes things real. It also makes patterns visible. And there it was. A sequence. He hadn't just timed his confession to me. He timed his narrative to the world. My phone rang. His name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, because I wanted to hear what he'd say when I finally did. The phone rang again. And again. On the fourth call, I picked up. "Catherine," he said, breathless. "I know this looks bad." "It doesn't look bad," I interrupted calmly. It looks intentional. Silence. Then, carefully, I'm trying to protect us. There it was again. I read the article, I said. You sound very concerned. I am concerned, he insisted. About me? I asked. Or about how this connects back to you? His exhale was slow, measured. That's when I knew he thought he still had leverage. We'll get through this, he said. Just, don't say anything yet. Don't say anything. The most powerful request a guilty person can make. I won't, I replied. And for the first time, it wasn't a lie. We hung up. I sat back in the chair and let the weight of it settle not on my chest, but in my hands. Because I could feel it now. The shift. This wasn't something happening to me anymore. This was something moving through me. By noon, the story had legs. By 1, it had opinions. By 2, it had decided who I was. And by 3, it had already begun to forget the man who helped write it. That's when I found the second file. The one he thought I'd never open. The second file wasn't hidden. That was the first thing that made my stomach drop. It sat in a folder labeled with a name I didn't recognize, casual, forgettable, designed to look like nothing. Not encrypted. Not locked. Just overlooked. The kind of place you hide something when you don't believe the person next to you will ever go looking. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, because part of me already knew this wasn't going to be about money. Money is messy. Money is explainable. This felt personal. Inside were emails. Not many, just enough. They weren't romantic. There were no hearts, no longing, no late-night confessions. That would have been easier to understand. Easier to hate. These were logistical. Efficient. They talked about timing, exposure, liability, and me. Not as a wife. As a buffer. One line kept repeating, phrased slightly differently each time. She'll absorb it. I read it once, then again. Then I stopped reading altogether and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling like it might explain how 12 years of marriage had distilled me into a concept. Absorb it. Like impact. Like damage. Like loss was something my body was designed to handle quietly. There was another name in the emails. A woman. Not an affair. Something worse. A partner. Someone who had never met me but knew exactly where I stood in relation to him. Between them and consequence. My hands finally started to shake. Not violently, just enough to notice. That's when heartbreak arrived, not loudly, not dramatically, but like a slow internal collapse. Like something essential loosening its grip. I thought about every time I had defended him without being asked. Every dinner where I softened his sharpness. Every silence I'd kept because it seemed kinder than conflict. All of it had trained him. I had trained him. There was one email marked draft. Unsent. He'd written it to her. If this goes sideways, Catherine will hold. She always does. I closed the laptop. Very carefully. Because if I slammed it, something inside me might have shattered completely. I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I expected to see devastation. Instead, I saw recognition. The kind that burns but clarifies. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't panic. This was a plan that required me to be predictable. Forgiving. Quiet. Strong in ways that only benefited him. And suddenly, every apology he'd ever given me rearranged itself into strategy. My phone buzzed. A message from him. Please don't panic. I'm handling it. I didn't respond. I placed the phone face down and sat on the edge of the tub, letting the weight finally settle where it belonged. In my chest. There's a moment when heartbreak stops hurting and starts teaching. This was that moment. I stood up, washed my hands, dried them slowly, and made a decision so quiet it almost felt like mercy. I would let him believe I was still absorbing it. Just a little longer. Because the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who uses you as a shield is step aside at the exact moment they need you most. After you realize someone has been using you as a structure, something meant to take the hit, there's a strange quiet that follows. Not relief. Not rage. Just absence. Like standing in a room after the furniture has been removed and noticing how loud the echo is. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I went back to the kitchen and washed the same mug 3 times before noticing it was already clean. The water ran too hot. My hands turned red. I didn't pull them away. Numbness is useful at first. It gives you time. By mid-afternoon, the story had evolved again. New headlines. New speculation. The words shifted, but my name remained anchored to every version. I watched it the way you watch weather from inside, aware of the damage but insulated just enough to think clearly. This was no longer about reputation. It was about endurance. He didn't come home. That told me more than any confession ever could. Instead, I received updates in fragments, texts phrased carefully, phone calls that ended too quickly. Each message was designed to reassure me without offering anything concrete. I'm still working. It's complicated. Trust me. The same lie repackaged. As evening fell, I sat alone in the living room with only the lamp on, my reflection faintly visible in the dark window. Outside, cars passed. Lives continued. Somewhere, people were laughing without knowing how fragile their own certainty was. I wondered how many times I had done that, laughed inside someone else's storm. At 7:18 p.m., a new email arrived. This one wasn't public. It was addressed directly to me. No pleasantries. No apologies. Just information. They had questions. They wanted clarity. They wanted cooperation. They assumed I would give it. I read it once. Then I deleted it. Not because I wouldn't respond, but because I wouldn't do it on their timeline. Power doesn't always look like defiance. Sometimes it looks like delay. I cooked dinner for one. I ate standing up. I barely tasted it. The television stayed off. Silence filled the house again, but this time it didn't feel threatening. It felt instructional. Silence tells you where you are. At 9:42 p.m., he finally called. I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. Then I answered. "Hey," I said. My voice sounded normal. Too normal. "I'm so sorry," he began. "Today just, I know," I said gently. "It's been a lot." He exhaled, audibly relieved. "I just need a little more time," he said. "Once this stabilizes." "Of course," I replied, and there it was. The moment he mistook my numbness for compliance. We said goodnight like nothing had fractured beyond repair. When the call ended, I sat in the dark and stared at my hands. They were steady now. The shaking had passed. That's when I understood something crucial. Heartbreak is loud. Anger is explosive. But numbness? Numbness is precise. It's where you start making decisions without emotion clouding the edges. I stood up and walked back into the office. I turned on the computer. Not to search. To plan. By the end of that night, I wouldn't be asking how to survive this. I'd be asking how to end it. Revenge doesn't arrive with a rush of adrenaline. That's a lie people tell to make it sound chaotic, impulsive, something that can be dismissed as emotional. Real revenge is quieter than grief. It begins when you stop asking why and start asking how. I sat at the desk with a legal pad I hadn't used in years. Not the laptop. Not the phone. Paper slows your thinking down. Forces you to choose each word. I wrote his name at the top. Then I drew a line beneath it. Nothing else. For a long time, planning isn't about imagining outcomes. It's about understanding systems. And the system he trusted most was predictability. Mine. I thought about the version of me he had built his plan around, the woman who absorbed pressure, who solved problems quietly, who believed loyalty was a shield instead of a liability. He had miscalculated something important. That version of me no longer existed. I didn't start with him. I started with myself. I made a list of everything I knew, accounts I had access to, documents I had signed, conversations I could reconstruct without notes. I wasn't gathering ammunition yet. I was identifying gravity. What pulled what? Who relied on whom? Where collapse would travel fastest? Then I did something he never expected. I stopped protecting him in my memory. Every moment I had once explained away I examined. Every discomfort I had swallowed I revisited. Patterns emerged. Not infidelity. Not cruelty. Worse, entitlement. At 1:14 a.m. I found the thing he had buried deepest. Not in files. In calendars, shared calendars. A recurring block every third Thursday, marked vague and movable. I followed it. Cross-referenced locations, expenses, gaps. And suddenly, the shape of a second life appeared, not emotional, not romantic, but strategic. A place where decisions were made without me. This wasn't a mistake he was cleaning up. It was a structure he'd been maintaining. And I had been the foundation. I didn't feel anger then. I felt clarity. The kind that turns your body cold and your mind sharp. By 2:30 a.m., the legal pad was full. Arrows. Names. Timelines. Not revenge fantasies. Contingencies. I wasn't planning to expose him. Not yet. Exposure is loud. And loud gives people time to adapt. What I needed first was proof that he believed I was still on his side. That he was still building his escape with me, unknowingly holding the door open. So I sent him a message. I trust you. Let me know what you need from me. It took him less than a minute to respond. Thank you. I knew you'd understand. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Understanding, I realized, is dangerous. It teaches people how far they can go. I turned off the lights in the office and walked back to the bedroom. I lay down next to his empty side of the bed. And for the first time since this began, I slept. Because by morning, I wouldn't be observing the structure anymore. I'd be stepping into it quietly, deliberately, and with a key he didn't know I had. Morning arrived without ceremony. No dread. No rush. Just clarity. I woke before my alarm and lay still, listening to the house breathe. There's a moment right after sleep where your body hasn't caught up to your mind yet, where instinct hasn't had time to interfere. That's when I knew I was ready. I didn't check my phone immediately. That was intentional. Urgency makes people careless. I wanted him to believe I was still waiting on his lead. I showered, dressed, chose neutral colors, nothing that asked questions or invited concern. I looked like the version of myself he trusted most. By the time I picked up my phone, there were 3 messages. All from him. Short. Careful. Morning. Big day. Call me when you can. I replied with one word, soon. The first door I closed wasn't public. It was administrative. The kind of door people don't notice until it refuses to open. I drove across town to an office he had always handled himself. He once told me it was simpler that way. I had believed him. It wasn't simpler. It was strategic. The woman at the desk recognized my name immediately. She smiled with professional warmth, the kind that assumes cooperation. I'm here to update contact authority, I said calmly. There's been a change. She didn't question it. Why would she? On paper, I had always been included. Just unused. I signed where I needed to. Provided identification. Confirmed preferences. The process took 15 minutes. That's all it took to shift leverage. When I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. Him. I answered. Hey, I said. Did you get a chance to talk? He asked. Things are moving fast. I know. I replied. I handled something for us this morning. There was a pause. What kind of something? I smiled. Stability, I said. Another pause. Longer. Okay, he said finally. Good. He didn't ask for details. Men who think they're in control never do. By noon, I'd closed the second door. Smaller. Quieter. A signature he assumed I'd never notice. I noticed. This wasn't revenge yet. This was insulation. Removing his ability to move freely while he still believed he was ahead of me. At 1:37 p.m., I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. They asked for clarification. I gave it truthfully, carefully, and with just enough distance to sound uninvolved. After I hung up, I sat in my car with the engine off, hands resting in my lap. I felt nothing. And that told me everything. He called again that evening. His voice was tighter now. Something's off, he said. People are asking questions. About me? I asked gently. No, he said. About things. I let the silence stretch. Then, that happens when systems adjust, I said. It'll settle, he exhaled. Trusted me. That night, I updated the legal pad. 2 doors closed, 4 left. He still believed the damage was external. He hadn't realized the house was being sealed from the inside. Structures don't fail all at once. They whisper first. A strain here. A delay there. You don't collapse a system by attacking its strongest points. You listen for the parts already under stress and lean into them gently. By the 3rd day, his voice had changed. Not panicked. Not angry. Compressed. The way men sound when they're trying to keep multiple versions of the truth aligned. He started calling more often. Not for information, for reassurance. How are you holding up? Are you getting a lot of messages? Has anyone contacted you directly? I answered honestly. Yes. No. Not yet. Truth, delivered selectively, is more convincing than lies. I spent those days observing. Not reacting to the headlines as they mutated. Not defending myself in conversations that wanted me emotional. I let people project. Meanwhile, I moved quietly, closing one path, loosening another, introducing friction where he expected flow. Nothing dramatic. Just resistance. The first test was small. I let one question land unanswered. A request he assumed would be handled the way I always handled things: promptly, efficiently, invisibly. This time I waited. 4 hours. Then 6. Then a full day. His response wasn't anger. It was confusion. "Did you see my message?" he asked carefully. "I did," I said. "I'm still looking into it." That phrase did something interesting to him. It forced him into uncertainty. Uncertainty is uncomfortable for people who build their lives around leverage. The second test was quieter. I forwarded an email. Not to him. To someone else. Someone he had assumed would never speak to me directly. I didn't add commentary. I let the information speak for itself. By the end of the week, he was no longer moving confidently. He was reacting. And reaction creates exposure. We met for coffee on Friday. Public place. Daylight. He chose the table. He chose the time. He thought he was setting the terms. I watched his hands when he spoke, how they fidgeted when he mentioned certain names, how they stilled when I said nothing at all. "You've been very calm," he said finally. "Have I?" I replied. "Yes," he said. "It's impressive." There it was. Admiration. The last refuge of someone losing control. "What happens if this doesn't resolve?" I asked. He blinked. "It will. And if it doesn't?" I pressed. He hesitated. "I have contingencies," he said. I smiled faintly. "I know," I said. "I've seen them." That was the first crack. His eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" I stood. "Just that," I said. "I understand the structure now." I left before he could respond. That night he didn't sleep. I knew because his messages arrived at irregular intervals, long gaps followed by short bursts of concern. I responded once. "We'll be fine." 2 words. Enough to keep him stationary. Pressure had done its job. The structure was starting to speak. By the next phase, I wouldn't be testing him anymore. I'd be choosing which truth to release and which one to weaponize. By the morning of the 10th day, the house felt smaller. Not physically, not the walls. But the weight of strategy presses differently when you know someone else's moves before they make them. I had been patient, methodical, and I had learned something crucial. He had underestimated me not once but consistently because he assumed loyalty blinded me. The revelation arrived quietly. I was reviewing a set of documents he thought I wouldn't find, the ones detailing his final contingencies, the exit plans designed to protect him if everything went sideways. And then I noticed a name. Not his. Not mine. Another woman. I froze. Not from shock. Not from fear. From understanding. This wasn't just him planning without me. This was him orchestrating a parallel strategy with someone else, someone who had been shaping outcomes behind my back. The emails made it clear. She wasn't romantic. She was leverage. Professional, calculating, precise. A partner in his schemes. And he had assumed I would never see her name. I reread everything. Every timeline. Every email. Every attachment. Every subtle hint of his confidence. And the twist hit me. He had been preparing not just for the fallout. He had been preparing for me to fail. I smiled quietly. Because this revelation did more than shock me. It reframed the entire game. I wasn't just responding anymore. I was now leading. By 11:42 a.m., I had mapped her role. The dependencies. The weak points. The threads that, if pulled, would unravel the plan she and he had built. I didn't panic. I didn't move rashly. I observed. I planned. And I realized something that would shift the next 48 hours irreversibly. He had created a shield, not realizing I had already become the sword. I called a trusted colleague, a silent ally I had cultivated without him knowing. We arranged a discreet meeting. The first step in rewriting the battlefield had begun. By the time I hung up, I was calm. Too calm, maybe. But that calm carried a new edge, one born not of rage but of foresight. I returned to the office. My legal pad, once filled with contingencies, now held coordinates for leverage. Coordinates for opportunity. Coordinates for control. I realized he had assumed the narrative, the timing, and the allies were his to command. He hadn't accounted for one thing: my patience. And patience, when measured precisely, is lethal. By evening, I sat back and reread the documents once more. The revelation wasn't just a twist. It was an invitation. And I accepted. By the next morning, he wouldn't just be unsure of my loyalty. He would be wondering if he had ever really understood who he married. By the time Wednesday arrived, I had him precisely where I wanted. Not desperate. Not panicked. Alert. Calculating. Vulnerable in ways he didn't notice. He believed he was still the orchestrator. I wasn't planning to expose him publicly yet. I was planning to show him himself. At 10:22 a.m. I found it. The single piece he had assumed was buried forever. It was an email draft he had never sent. Not a confession. Not a plan. A miscalculation. A timeline that contradicted his own narrative. He had set in motion a domino chain that he hadn't accounted for. Something small, almost invisible. A contract clause buried in legalese. A number that didn't match his accounting. A timestamp showing he had been in two places at once, or so he thought. And I saw it. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of it sink in. If I revealed this publicly, it would ruin him instantly. If I kept it private, it gave me leverage the likes of which he had never imagined. At 11:03 a.m., he called me. "Catherine," he said, voice steady. "We need to finalize." I interrupted. "Finalize what?" There was a pause. Longer than usual. "Calculated, you know," he said finally. "The mitigation." I smiled. Quietly, calmly. "Actually," I said, "I just reviewed something that changes everything." His voice faltered, ever so slightly. "What do you mean?" I said, "you missed a step. And it's irreversible." The line went silent. He assumed I had discovered the wrong file. He assumed panic. He assumed chaos. I assumed none of it. By noon, I had positioned myself in his world differently. He didn't know it yet. He didn't know I was no longer operating within the boundaries he had imagined. He didn't know I had already seen the future he was trying to manipulate. Everything changed with that email. Because now, I wasn't just reacting. I was directing. And every decision he had made up to that point became a vulnerability. By the next day, he would discover the cost of underestimating the person who never panicked and never forgave. Power doesn't announce itself when it changes hands. It moves quietly like a weight shifting beneath a table you've leaned on for years, right before you fall. I slept well that night. That's how I knew the balance had tipped. The next morning, I woke before dawn and made coffee the way I always had. Same mug, same routine. Familiarity is disarming. It convinces people nothing fundamental has changed. He texted at 6:18 a.m. "Can we talk today?" In person. Not a request. A need. I replied 10 minutes later. "This afternoon works." No reassurance. No resistance. Just availability. By then, the lever was already moving. At 7:42 a.m., I made the call I had been postponing, not because I was unsure, but because timing matters more than courage. The person on the other end of the line didn't greet me warmly. They greeted me carefully. That was good. I didn't accuse. I didn't threaten. I asked questions. Specific ones. Questions that only make sense when you already know the answers. By the time the call ended, there was an understanding, unspoken but absolute. I was no longer someone they could ignore. At 9:15 a.m., the first consequence landed. Not public. Not dramatic. A delay. Something he had been counting on. Stalled. He felt it immediately. He called. I didn't answer. The second consequence arrived just before noon. A meeting cancelled. A decision deferred. The language was polite. Apologetic. Irrevocable. That's when he started unraveling, not outwardly, not yet, but in the spaces between his messages. Too many words. Too much explanation. Men who believe they are still in control don't explain themselves. We met at 2 p.m. Same cafe. Same table. He looked composed, well-dressed, slightly thinner. "You said you found something," he began. I waited. Silence unsettles people more than confrontation. Finally, I spoke. "You always assumed I'd protect you," I said calmly. "Not because you asked me to, but because I always did." He nodded. Carefully. I'm asking you now, he said. There it was. The pivot. I know, I replied. That's the problem. His brow furrowed. I slid my phone across the table. Not the email. Not the evidence. Just the timeline. Dates. Times. Dependencies. Enough to let his imagination do the damage. He didn't touch the phone. He stared at it like it might bite him. Where did you get this? He asked. I've always been here, I said. You just never looked. His mouth opened, closed. For the first time since this began, he said nothing. I'm not exposing you, I continued. I'm not destroying you. Relief flashed across his face too quickly. I'm stepping away, I said. At the exact points where you need me most. That relief evaporated. You can't, he said quietly. I tilted my head. I already have. The realization spread slowly across his features. This wasn't a fight he could win. Not because I was louder. Not because I was crueler. Because I had changed the rules without telling him. We stood to leave. He reached for my arm. I let him. Just long enough for him to understand that permission was temporary now. I never meant to hurt you, he said. I met his eyes. I know. I replied. You just didn't care if you did. I walked away. By evening, the structure he'd built was no longer responding to him the way it used to. Doors didn't open. Calls didn't return. And for the first time he was moving inside a system he didn't control. He still thought this was damage control. He hadn't realized the dominoes were already falling. By dawn, the first betrayal had fallen. Not publicly, not dramatically. Just quietly, the kind of subtle failure that makes people question their own competence without realizing someone else orchestrated it. I watched from the kitchen, sipping coffee, letting the silence in the house absorb the tremor. At 8:17 a.m., the first call came. From his assistant. She didn't know I was listening. Catherine. We tried, but they won't authorize it without you. I smiled faintly. No satisfaction. No gloating. Just acknowledgement. The second domino fell at 9:43 a.m. A meeting cancelled. A partner pulling out. A project delayed. Each ripple was predictable. Each ripple was irreversible. He had built everything to move like clockwork. I had learned the gears. By noon, the third domino landed. His reputation already fraying in whispers and tentative articles stumbled into uncertainty. Stakeholders asked questions he couldn't answer. Partners looked at him sideways. He called me. Short, hesitant. I can fix this, he said. I didn't answer. Instead, I sent one message. You can only fix what exists in your hands. The rest is already moving. Silence. That silence was heavier than any accusation. By the afternoon, the final domino began to lean. It wasn't public. It wasn't loud. But emails were redirected, approvals paused, alliances frayed. The system he had built around himself was unspooling. And he was still inside it, believing he controlled the flow. At 3:16 p.m., I received a forwarded note from an external partner, someone he had assumed would always align with him. Their message. We need Catherine's approval first. He hadn't sent it. He hadn't asked for it. He couldn't undo it. I leaned back in the chair and let it all settle. This was the beauty of quiet control. The system moved exactly as it should without me having to shout, manipulate, or even appear present. By evening, he was calling frantically. Short clipped messages, unanswered voicemails. Every attempt to regain control only confirmed what he feared in his gut. He was no longer the one who moved the pieces. And in that quiet, calculated chaos, I realized the final truth. Revenge doesn't need fireworks. It just needs precision. Timing, patience, and a mind that never stops calculating. By tomorrow, he would realize the full cost and it would be irreversible. By the following morning, his composure was a fragile thing, thin glass, ready to crack under the lightest pressure. I didn't approach him immediately. I let the space grow. Let the weight of the previous 12 days press against him. People break more thoroughly when they believe they're still in control. He called first. Short, clipped. Catherine. We need to talk. Please. Now. I agreed, but I didn't hurry. I wanted him to feel the anticipation, the anxiety of someone who has finally realized they are unmoored. We met at a neutral cafe. Mid-morning. Bright. Public. But not crowded. He arrived first, hands fidgeting. He ordered coffee and checked his watch every 2 minutes. I sat down, calm, composed. The air between us already heavy with unspoken truth. "You've changed," he said quietly, trying to mask it with an attempt at charm. "I've always been capable," I replied softly. "You just never gave me reason to show it." His face tightened. I didn't realize," he began. But I stopped him with a slight shake of my head. "Realize what?" I asked. He faltered. His hands gripped the table. "How much control you have." I leaned in slightly, enough for him to feel the weight behind my calm. "Control?" I whispered. "I never needed it. You gave it to me." His exhale was sharp. His facade of dominance crumbling. You've dismantled everything I built," he said. Voice low. Trembling. I tilted my head. "Everything you built? Or everything you assumed you controlled?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. I let the silence stretch. Let him sit with it. Let him feel the fear of a man who realized that patience and precision beat arrogance and assumption. Finally, he spoke. I didn't know you'd." "I've always known," I interrupted, calm, cold. "The difference is I acted while you were busy believing in forgiveness you didn't earn." He slumped slightly, a first real sign of defeat. The carefully constructed mask of composure shattered in small, almost imperceptible movements. The tapping of his fingers, the shallow breathing, the way he avoided my eyes. Can we fix this?" he asked, desperation bleeding into his voice. I leaned back. My voice was soft, almost reflective. "Fix what? The illusion? The lies? The way you assumed I would never step out from under your shadow." He swallowed. Nothing came out. "You underestimated me," I continued, letting each word land like a measured blow. "You assumed loyalty meant submission. You assumed patience meant weakness. And now," I paused. "Now you're learning the truth about what happens when someone finally decides they are in control." For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not anger, not defiance. Fear. The fear of a man who thought he had molded the narrative only to discover he was now part of someone else's story. By the end of this week, he wouldn't just be broken, he'd be irrelevant. People assume the final twist is loud. A confession, a courtroom, a headline with teeth. They're wrong. The most devastating shifts happen quietly when someone realizes the ending they've been preparing for isn't the one arriving. I didn't confront him again after that meeting. That was intentional. Confrontation suggests negotiation. This was already finished. 3 days later, the final piece surfaced not because I went looking for it, but because pressure has a way of forcing truth upward. It arrived as a forwarded message from someone who had finally chosen self-preservation over loyalty. Short. Apologetic. Late. Inside was the confirmation he had sworn didn't exist. Not just proof of manipulation. Not just corroboration of intent. But a document that placed him, not me, at the center of the entire structure. He hadn't just used my name as cover. He had designed the fallout so that, once things escalated, my silence would implicate me. And my cooperation would exonerate him. I had been meant to disappear into ambiguity. The irony? The document required my signature to activate. A final safeguard. One he had assumed he could extract from me with enough regret, or enough fear. I didn't sign it. I archived it, time-stamped, stored, untouched. And in that moment, the game ended. Because the truth is this, he didn't lose because I exposed him. He lost because I refused to finish his story. That afternoon his attorney called. Measured voice. Polite concern. They wanted to clarify my position. I did. "I'm not involved," I said calmly. "And I won't be." There was a pause on the line. Then recalculation. Within hours, the narrative shifted. Subtly, carefully. Language adjusted, focus narrowed, and slowly, quietly, the weight moved. Off my name. Onto his. He texted me that night. Just one line. "Please." I stared at it longer than I expected. Not because I felt tempted. Because I felt finished. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone. And for the first time since 3:07 a.m., I slept without anticipation. What comes after revenge isn't victory. It's something quieter and far more dangerous. The days after the final twist were quiet. too quiet for anyone who had watched the storm unfold. I didn't make announcements. I didn't revel in his failures. I simply moved forward step by calculated step. I reopened my office. Not to check messages. Not to chase headlines. But to reclaim my rhythm, my decisions, my agency. The structure I had been forced to absorb for years was now mine to design. The clients returned not because I begged, but because competence carries its own gravity. The emails flowed, yes, but filtered through the lens I controlled. Every call, every meeting, every handshake reminded me that quiet precision outweighs chaos disguised as charm. I took moments for myself, small ones. A long walk along the California coastline, a coffee in the sun, a book left open on the desk. Not indulgence. Not celebration. Just grounding. He attempted contact a few more times. Brief messages, hints of regret, offers of reconciliation. I ignored them all. Because ignoring is not passive. Ignoring is decisive. By the end of the week, I had reconstructed my life exactly the way I wanted. Strategic. Balanced. Observed but unassailable. I wasn't just surviving. I was sovereign. The lesson was clear. Power isn't measured by who shouts the loudest. It's measured by who moves while the world is distracted. I stood on the balcony one evening, looking at the sun dip behind the horizon, and for the first time in months I felt untouchable. Not invincible. Not cruel. Just complete. Because the real victory isn't what you take from someone. It's what you reclaim for yourself silently, irrevocably, and entirely. The house was still. Not the tense stillness of anticipation. Not the charged silence of waiting for a call or a message. This was calm, measured, complete. I sat in my office, legal pad open, coffee warm at my side, no deadlines pressed, no crises loomed. Just the clarity of a life rearranged on my terms. I reflected on the months prior, the betrayal, the manipulation, the long nights of uncertainty. Each moment had been a lesson in patience, observation, and calculation. I realized something essential. Revenge is not about destruction. It's about restoration. Restoration of dignity. Restoration of control. Restoration of the self that others assume they can define. I walked through the home, noticing the subtle changes. Photos straightened, documents in order. Spaces that once felt like mine but weren't truly controlled by me, now completely aligned with my intent. It wasn't ostentatious. It wasn't performative. It was sovereignty, quiet and undeniable. He tried one last time to reach me, pleas, explanations, offers of reconciliation, but I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. Out of choice. Because the most powerful moments are those where silence speaks louder than confrontation. I stepped onto the balcony, the California sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I breathed. Fully. Freely. Without anticipation. I understood the final truth. The world doesn't hand power to the patient. The world doesn't forgive the clever. It simply moves. And those who learn to move within it quietly, deliberately, and without spectacle are the ones who last. I had survived. I had learned. I had reclaimed. And in that quiet victory, I realized, I had become more than I ever was when I was absorbing. I was complete. Because the story ends not when the adversary falls, but when you rise silently, irrevocably, and entirely on your own terms.